when you talk about unconscionable contracts, the first thing is that the cases kind of state that it's a contract that shocks the conscience. In other words, it's so one-sided that there's an issue. So typically speaking, it is a kind of a consumer protection, oriented defense to non-performance of the contract. Not always the case, but most of the time, if you're dealing with a consumer versus a business, it's going to be the consumer that's going to make that argument, not the business. However, you do have contracts between businesses where one side could say, look, I was taken advantage of because of the language in here. Now, certainly, if you're dealing with another business, you should always have an attorney that practices in the business law area to review the contract if you have any questions. But one of the biggest red flags is that if you have a contract that appears to be pro forma, in other words, it looks like it's been typed off of a form and you have this really small boilerplate language that you almost need a magnifying glass to read. But just because it may be boilerplate doesn't mean that those terms are not enforceable. So certainly you need to read pretty much every word of the contract, and you should have skilled counsel to review those. If you're looking for unconscionable, unfortunately, that defense is usually thrown up after you've already, or thrown out there, I should say, after the contract has been executed. So if you see something that looks entirely one-sided and that there's no room for negotiations, then you may want to beware of that in the first place. Then you don't have to argue that it's unconscionable, because you look at the contract, or your attorney looks at the contract and go, this is so one-sided. Well, really, they're not giving us any leeway to negotiate, and it's just patently unfair. Those kind of contracts you should really just leave. And so unconscionability doesn't come into play during the negotiations. It's kind of a technical standpoint. It's used after a contract has been negotiated.